Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. And do I have quite a doozy for you today? Today I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about heroic medieval adventures and men in black, although not the kind that you're probably thinking of. I am referring to The Princess Bride, S. Morgenstern's classic tale of true love and high adventure by William Goldman, and this was published in 1972. For those who don't know, William Goldman was a screenwriter and an author, writing nonfiction, writing movies, and writing books. He's known for writing The Princess Bride. I think that's probably his most famous story. And he also wrote the screenplay for the Princess Bride movie, which is why the movie and the book have a lot of similarities, although there are a couple differences here and there that I'll maybe note as I'm talking about this. But Goldman was also a very accomplished screenwriter. He got he got nominated for Academy Awards for All the President's Men, which is one of the more famous movies of the 70s, and also for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which a lot of people regard as one of the best westerns ever made. And so, yeah, he just spent his entire life making quality movies and writing pretty good books. Although this is the only book that I've read from him so far, I would like to explore more of his work because this book was pretty high quality, and his writing style and the way that he told the story was different than anything that I've really encountered before. I'd say this has a similar vibe or feelings to House of Leaves, but not 100%. Like it shares like a couple similarities here and there. And I guess I'll talk about that a little bit later. But without further ado, let's talk about The Princess Bride. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Princess Bride actually tells, I would say, two different stories. The first story is the main story, and that's the story of Buttercup and Westley and Florin. The second story that it tells is William Goldman, or a fictionalized version of himself, trying to track down S. Morgenstern's story, The Princess Bride. Where he talks about how it was read to him as a child, and when he tracked it down later in life, he discovered that his father only read certain bits of it, because the full Princess Bride was actually a satirical look of the relationship between Florin and Gilder in medieval Europe. And Goldman realized no one was really going to read that entire story, no matter how well acclaimed it was by Florin scholars. And so he sets about abridging it, putting in only the good parts, as he says. And then the rest of the story is him making comments on why he abridged certain parts of it and what he noticed about the original story, which I think is pretty fascinating. But yeah, that's one aspect of it. And the other part is Buttercup and Westley in medieval Florin. Westley and Buttercup fall in love, and Westley decides he's going to travel to America in order to make a name for himself, get some money, and provide for Buttercup later on. But while he is traveling there, his ship is attacked by the dread pirate Roberts, and Westley is presumed dead at that point. And Buttercup swears that she'll never love again. And a short while later, Prince Humperdinck of the Florin Kingdom comes calling and decides he wants to marry her. And although they don't love each other, Buttercup decides that this is a good way to to be taken care of in life. And so they decide to get married, although Buttercup has nightmares about leaving Westley behind and not really being in love. In the lead up to their wedding, Buttercup is actually kidnapped by a swordsman named Inigo, a giant sort of wrestler man named Fezzik, and an intelligent hunchback named Vizzini, where their orders are to take her to the Gilder frontier and kill Buttercup in order to start a war between Florin and Gilder. We get a little bit about Inigo's backstory, about how he's searching for revenge for the death of his father, as well as Fezzik's backstory about how he's always been picked on because of how he's tall, and even though he tried to fight, that didn't necessarily help things as well. And they're basically ordered to stay behind while a man in black pursues Vizzini and company, presumably to get his hands on Buttercup. The man in black sword fights Inigo and ends up winning despite Inigo's talent. And he ends up wrestling Fezzik and manages to defeat him despite Fezzik's amazing wrestling ability. He then pursues Vizzini, engages in a battle of wits, and gets Vizzini to drink poison, and then basically grabs Buttercup, and they set about running away from the rapidly approaching Prince Humperdinck. At this point, the man in black reveals that he is actually Westley, and he talks about how he was kidnapped by the pirate and eventually trained to take over the ship, and it was revealed that the Dread Pirate Roberts is actually a floating identity passed down to different people. And they, Westley and Buttercup end up reconciliating, getting back together. Although Buttercup is a bit hesitant to fully reconcile because Westley died before, and she's kind of forgotten how to love. They flee into the fire swamp where they fight giant rats and get out of quicksand or something like that. But unfortunately, they are captured by Humperdinck. And although Humperdinck assures Buttercup that no harm will come to Westley, he ends up having Westley imprisoned and then pretends to look for him a short while later when Buttercup decides, yes, she does actually love Westley. In a fit of rage because Buttercup won't love Humperdinck and she challenges his bravery and whatnot, Humperdinck ends up killing Westley in a torture machine and discarding him. But luckily, Inigo and Fezzik regain their mojo and end up finding Westley. And they find his dead body and bring him to a Miracle Max, who promises a miracle in bringing back Westley, although he'll be pretty powerful for about an hour. When he finally comes back to life, a short while after that, he's gonna be weakened, and so they have to basically work hard to get Buttercup back. Westley, Inigo, and Fezzik break into the wedding. Inigo manages to kill Count Rugen, the six-fingered man who killed his father, and Westley manages to confront Humperdinck and challenge him to a duel to the pain, where he basically promises to maim him if he wins this duel. This appropriately scares Humperdinck, and he flees from the fight, and the entire gang flee on horses and presumably live a happy life. Although Goldman notes that that's the ending that he prefers, he notes that in Morgenstern's original ending, they were pursued by Humperdinck, suggesting that they're going to live their entire life on the run. Although Buttercup and Westley have each other, and so that's a good moment for them, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with this story. I should note that I didn't talk about everything in this, because there's an end section like for 100 pages where Goldman talks about Buttercup's daughter, Buttercup's baby, where it's sort of like an afterword or a new book entirely, where Goldman was working his entire life after this story to create a sequel, but never fully was able to complete it. because as he said, like Morgenstern's estate was very unhappy with him trying to do that. But it seems like Goldman was never able to complete that story before he died, unfortunately. I should just note that that's in here as well, although I'm not going to talk about it too much. But some of the ideas that Goldman is working with in this story, one of them includes love. Like he's talking about true love, those ideas. And at its heart, Princess Bride is a love story. It's very much so about Buttercup and Westley's love and the trials and tribulations that they encounter as they navigate through that love. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you. "I have stayed these years in my hovel because of you. I have taught myself languages because of you. I have made my body strong because I thought you might be pleased by a strong body. I have lived my life with only the prayer that some sudden dawn you might glance in my direction. I have not known a moment in years when the sight of you did not cease or did not send my heart careening against my ribcage." And that's Wesley telling Buttercup how much he loves her, and Buttercup kind of responding the same way, although a little hesitant at first. And so it's very clear that Goldman is writing a love story here, and he's trying to say that love is beautiful, the love that Wesley and Buttercup share, but it's not entirely easy because it requires both people to be participating and for circumstances to be beneficial to both people. You can't have love, or a strong love at least, in a war zone or when you're trying to flee for your lives. One example of this very difficult period of very difficult obstacle for the love is Wesley's presumed death at the hand of the dread pirate Roberts. It sends Buttercup spiraling into a deep despair where she's like, I can never love again. And so she's willing to marry Prince Humperdinck because she just presumes that Wesley's not around. She might as well get married to somebody, and who better than Prince Humperdinck? Like he's got a high station in life. So there's an obstacle there that for that love that Buttercup doesn't can't really get across. And even when she does meet Wesley, that obstacle, that despair is still there for her. Allow me to read you another interesting quote. Buttercup turned to Wesley. There, she said, you can't ask for more than that, and that is the truth. The truth, said Wesley, is that you would rather live with your prince than die with your love. I would rather live than die, I admit it. We are talking of love, madam. There was a long pause. Then Buttercup said it. I can live without love. And there's Buttercup really kind of showing that she hasn't moved on from that despair of losing Wesley before. She might be afraid that she's going to lose him again. And she doesn't realize until almost too late, like when Wesley dies again, that she actually does love him. But that might be more out of a sense of guilt that the only person who's truly loved her doesn't she doesn't love them back. So she might be sort of guilted into that. But I don't think that's what Goldman is trying to say there. I think ultimately it's a very simple message. True love wins over evil. It's a very simple message, but it's a very effective message. Goldman also talks about pain in this story. Enough that I really think he's trying to send a message about pain and about how life is unfair, kind of shared messages in that regard. He argues that life is full of pain, that there are moments where we suffer and it might not be just, but it happens. As Buttercup's mother says, and that's the difference between the book and the movie. In the movie, Wesley says it, but Buttercup's mother in the book says life is pain. Anyone who says different is trying to sell you something. And then you have Count Rugen, whose entire life seems to be built on pain, causing suffering to Inigo by killing his father, and then being obsessed with the pain machine in the book and in the Zoo of Death, where he creates an entire machine designed to cause only pain and suck away life. And then he studies it like he's doing research, and he says that this research on pain is what's going to make him immortal. Very psychotic when you think about it, but this fascination with pain guides Count Rugen. And then when Wesley and Humperdinck are doing their duel, Humperdinck says to the death, whereas Wesley says to the pain, meaning he wants to cause additional pain to Humperdinck, whereas like killing him would be too easy. He wants him to live a life of agony and suffering, much that he delivered to Westley when he killed him, and the only way to do that is by maiming him to the point where he becomes unrecognizable, and he causes torment to any of the children and women who see him in the streets, which is very deliberate, I think, on Goldman's part. He's trying to show that something worse than death is just pure pain itself, a life where you cannot die or are not allowed to die by someone who might be controlling you. And I do think this is a very dark message to have, but Goldman counters it, I think, by showing that both love and friendship stand to defeat pain if it's present. The love that Westley and Buttercup share is enough to counter death, is enough to counter pain of death, which I think is beautiful. But even more so than that, like friendship can counter all of this pain. Because Inigo and Fezzik both have a lot of pain in their life. Fezzik from losing his parents, Fezzik from being tormented all of his life for his size, and Inigo losing his father. But when they have each other, like they both find solace in Vizzini, as much as a con man, as much as a terrible person he is. Like Vizzini, like he loved, or he might not have loved, but he treated Inigo and Fezzik like they were real human people, like they were friends. And so that friendship managed to counter the pain that they were having in life. And when they become separate, it's interesting that Inigo turns straight back to drinking and feeling like he has nothing in life. So both love and friendship seem to counter pain, according to William Goldman. And then also at the same time, related to that is the message that life is inherently unfair. He says as such when Westley dies. He's like, that's sad. Like even when Goldman was reading this as a child in the meta-narrative, like he's like, wow, this doesn't seem fair. Why does Buttercup have to marry Humperdinck? And more so, why does Humperdinck get away? And Goldman is saying, life is pain. Life is unfair. This is stuff that we have to deal with. Sometimes the bad guy gets away. Sometimes bad guys are not appropriately punished. Very interesting that this book came out in the 70s, around the time that Nixon was doing Nixon things. Maybe that there was some influence there. I probably doubt it, but something to consider as you're reading this. And then another interesting element of this story is the unreliable narrator theme that's going on here. And it happens through multiple aspects of this story. The first is through the book being abridged. Goldman says he has abridged this book and he's omitted a few things. And and he even talks about what he's omitting in the meta-narrative in sections where he's interrupting the story, talking about how he's omitting a deep discussion of Florin and Gilder and their relationship, the packing chapters where it's just the characters packing for trips, as well as other aspects of what's going on in the story, saying that to include it would be annoying or boring or something like that. But I do think the omissions matter. It's meant to be humorous, like on Goldman's part, but if he's including it here, so it's worth talking about, making the narrator a bit unreliable, the abridged book, because you're completely changing the type of story it is. Whereas before it's a satire of European history, now it's a straightforward action story that doesn't really do much to talk about the nature of Florin and Gilder. Like the main focus might have been Florin and Gilder, like in the original version, but here it's Buttercup and Westley, which I think is interesting. How we can change the nature of a story just by abridging it. And then you also have Goldman's dad in this story, who read the story to him as a child, but excluded certain parts, changing the meaning of the story entirely, making him a bit of an unreliable narrator as well. It didn't seem that he changed too much about it, but again, like like William Goldman went his whole life thinking the story was about one thing when he actually found out that it was about another. And then you also have Morgenstern, who is a bit of an unreliable writer here in the story, because he's writing about Florin and Gilder, presenting the story in a way where he's writing also about European history, but he's doing it in a contradictory way. This story seems to be set in medieval times, but for some reason, Westley specifically mentions to going to America, which doesn't sync up with the timeline, as well as the other aspects of like Paris and the existence of France, but not the existence of Germany or any other sort of place. Like the story is told out of sequence, which Goldman says, was probably done not intentionally, but as a way of simply moving the plot forward to the action bits. And so Morgenstern is an unreliable narrator. And I really like this aspect of the story, because it presents a meta-narrative where we ultimately discuss like what stories are about and how we choose to tell stories. And ultimately what bits of those stories that we remember. Even though The Princess Bride, the original version, might have been a satire, the thing that we remember most from it is the action story, the story of adventure. And we do that for many other stories as well as they're passed down. Like I'm sure the original Shakespeare stories of all the things he wrote were about different things, and they were eventually passed down and kind of translated, changed in a bit that didn't ruin the story, but changed their original meaning, which I find to be very fascinating. And it's interesting that Goldman might be trying to get at that here. And then there are other things about the story that I find really interesting, including the sword fights, the bits of action. They're really high quality. Goldman's a good writer in that regard, and it makes sense because he wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, as well as other sort of action-y kind of movies, and so it makes sense that he'd be able to translate great action scenes into a book like this. There is a scene where they're sort of fighting animals in the Zoo of Death, which I feel is unnecessary and kind of boring, but I feel like that's one of the only low points in the story. And then there's also great characters. I really like Westley. I really like Buttercup, and Humperdinck is a really great evil character, as well as Count Rugen. And also Inigo's story and his background, absolutely amazing, as well as Fezzik. Fezzik is a really lovable character, and the aspect of revenge in this story that drives Inigo is very fascinating, because he completely relies on the man in black being alive in order to get his revenge. So his motivation for bringing Westley back to life is not truly heroic. He's entirely driven by getting revenge on Count Rugen in order to avenge his father. And if he's not able to achieve that, he completely devastates him, and he turns to drinking. And that's a very really sad character. Inigo is amazing, but also very tragic in his writing. Goldman does a wonderful job there. And there aren't too many problems with this story. The Zoo of Death section is kind of boring, as I noted before. But also Westley, one issue with Westley is he's too mean towards Buttercup. This also shows up in the movie version, where it seems like Wesley is written to be a bit of a misogynist, just treating Buttercup with disregard, and Buttercup sometimes being this pure object. Buttercup's not interested in her as a person, he's interested in her body, or winning her as a trophy, which is what you typically see in classic adventure stories. But I still feel the need to point out it. It's one of the weaker aspects of both the book and the movie, but it's not enough to sink it. But I do think that should be discussed when talking about The Princess Bride. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Princess Bride by William Goldman. An amazing story, one of the best books that I've read this year so far. I wasn't expecting to like it that much, but I think because Goldman does such a great job of bringing these characters to life, it makes the story overall really fascinating and really interesting to read, and combined with the whole meta-narrative that's going on. I wasn't really expecting that, and I thought it was a breath of fresh air. And again, I mentioned that it was similar to House of Leaves, and I do think the meta-narratives there are pretty similar, in that injecting the authors into the stories and making it about sort of their pursuit of the story itself, rather than just about the story. And I think that's a really interesting discussion, and allows for more considerations when you analyze the story. So yeah, I definitely think I recommend this to you out there. I also recommend going and watch the movie if you haven't already seen it, which is rare because it is a classic. I do think it's translated pretty well, and that's because William Goldman wrote both the book and the movie, which he did a great job there. If you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about The Princess Bride. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about The Princess Bride if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and man in black travels. Farewell.